Welcome to this session, Strategies to De-escalate Low-Level Negative Behavior. My name is Kim Snowball. I am the NKCES facilitator for this session today, and I'm looking forward to sharing resources that will help build a positive culture in your classroom for all students. First thing we're going to look at is the training guide. On this training guide, you will find there are additional links to some resources that you should find helpful. One is the actual article that we're going to be talking about today, the 5 ways to de-escalate challenging student behavior. But we're also going to give you access to a PDF of the power struggle, and then another table that we'll talk about here in a minute. Our learning intention for today is really to have you, the participant, learn about these GGIs, what we call gentle guidance interventions, to reduce this power struggle between teachers and the students. We want to set a positive learning culture. So we're going to start off with just looking at some of the core foundation pieces that need to be put into place and that we need to be always thinking about when we start off the year or as we go through the year to make sure that we implement. These are called evidence-based practices, and these are the evidence-based practices for behavior. They come from an article that was released in 2019 called Implementation of the Promising Practices That Support Students with Emotional Behavior Disorders. But what we did was took the actual EBPs and put them in a table that is in a very teacher-friendly format to help you reflect on your current practices and how you could then embed or implement each of these as you move through the school year. The reason why I wanted to make sure that you see these and have access to these is because these are, like I said, the foundational pieces to help create a proactive approach to behavior. We want to make sure that we've done everything possible to reduce barriers and to reduce the incidents that we might have in our classroom. And it's really looking through the lens of maybe things like creating those structures and predictability so that students feel successful and they don't feel like they're unsure when they walk in. There's too many uncertainties, and we have when we have the ability to create that predictability in those structures. It's also about creating those positive classroom expectations and the rules that are created with the students, but also having some different behavior strategies that might help, such as like a token economy that we can build in and non-contingent reinforcers. But also remember that we give a lot of feedback on academics, but we also need to make sure we're constantly reinforcing good behavior with behavior-specific praise. We also think about our explicit instruction in academics, but when we think about it in behavior, we need to make sure we need to explicitly model good behavior with students, what should and should not be done in a classroom. So some examples and some non-examples of the expectations. And so we need to teach social skills as well as academic skills. We need to make sure that we provide opportunities for students to respond, and we need to be embedding some good questions in there. And some of these actually are part of what we're going to be talking about today. But always making sure that everything that we're doing, whether it's in academics or behavior, that we're collecting data. And so this actual tool will be within, a link will be in your training guide. The other piece that's going to be in your training guide is actually this PDF that will help you evaluate 12 different ways to avoid or defuse power struggles within your classroom. And we wanted to make sure that you had access to it so that it's a nice refresher. These are great things to actually bring to PLCs and make sure that if students are struggling with power struggles, or teachers are struggling with students that are struggling with power struggle, there's a lot of struggles going on there. But anyway, that you have some additional tools. Now, let's get into why we are here today for this short little mini session. What about when we are confronted with low level negative behavior? And I want to make sure that we're not talking the big behaviors where kids are screaming down the hall, but we're talking about the little small things that can escalate into a larger big behavior. What should we do? What strategies should we have to help de escalate? And so this article came out just this past March of 2022. And I remember reading it thinking, this is what you see in in classrooms where teachers are veterans or really have built a relationship with students. And it talks about the different ways you can de-escalate challenging student behavior. And we're talking about low-level behavior using gentle guidance interventions. What I also wanted to make sure is that you see is that I do have the book in here that I'm trying to make sure you can see this, but it is a book that talks about 42 other ways, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But we're just really going to focus on the 5 that we have here in this short little snippet so that you have some easily implementable tools in your back pocket when you run into some challenging behaviors. Here's the book, just in case you didn't get to see the entire thing. And I love the fact that there's a quote in the book that says, gentle guidance interventions create inclusive classrooms where everyone is feeling that they have a place and they know how to navigate. And so that leads us to our first password, power struggles. Now, I know that when we talked about this training guide, you also needed to make sure you had a paper and a pencil because I've left a room down at the bottom for you to actually write down the 3 passwords that are on here. You're going to need those to access your certificate. So make sure that you're jotting down this. So pause, jot down the first password, power struggles. You'll need them in order as well. Let's think about this. We're in the middle of our classroom, and what if a student's behavior is not in sync with the expectations or the student created classroom rules? So, what if the students are continually talking, and you've already given them the signal? Maybe it was give me 5, and you've created a routine to bring them all back together. What can we do? What tools can we use? I love this because it is, and I'm going to take my glasses off this. It's really in the book he talks about in chapter 9. There's 4 different eye interventions, but I love the confused eye because I feel like even if you're a parent, you use this. If you're not a parent, you have parents, that have used this. You know what we're talking about. It really is the confused eye. It's where you're like, it really what you're doing in just a split second is you're letting the student know that you are wonderful and the behavior that you're exhibiting is really not all that wonderful. What has happened? I'm confused. It's quick. We use it many times when we're really not even aware that we're using it. The only downfall, they say, and Scott Irvin will talk about this, is that you have to have the students looking at you at that time. So keep that in mind. So very simple. And again, in the book, on page 193, you'll find this one, but you'll also find 3 other different types of which or eye interventions. What if the student brings contraband to the class? And when I talk about contraband, I'm not talking about drugs. I'm not talking about something that's illegal. I'm talking about things that, that are not permitted to come to the class. Like, what if they bring a Game Boy or or some type of gaming device, and it's definitely not part of, the activity that we're going to be doing today. It might be that there are sometimes that you might be doing an activity in a math class where you're not using calculators, or you don't want them to be bringing the graphing calculator out, or you don't want them to have their devices out. What happens at that moment? What should you do? So think about, what would you do? Simple. The contraband tap. Why didn't we think about this? And this is really just really good practices. So it's simply, going through and walking by, doing almost like a drive by. You don't stop, you keep walking, but all you're going to do is you're just going to tap on the phone or tap on the device and just reminds, it just reiterates. You're never making eye contact, so it's just a quick tap and go by. Keep in mind that that should be your first stop. It's very low key, so just try it. Okay. What if the students are off task or not doing what they're supposed to do? Okay, we've got students having conversations, or they're they're not doing the assignment. What would you do? Remember, low level negative behavior, and we're trying to de-escalate, but trying to move students forward. Hmm. Assumption of intelligence. This is one I just love. You pass by the students without making eye contact, and you ask the students, or you say, you know what to do. And it's in a nice, friendly voice. And I think that's part of it, because what we know is that most of the students know what they should be doing anyway. We don't want to be telling them or retelling them what to do. This creates a power struggle. And in that article we were talking about there, when we talk about the impossible choice, there's two things that can happen when students are off task or not doing what they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, or they're not doing their assignment, or working as expected. You can ignore the behavior, or you can make a declarative statement. And when you do either one of those, you send two really negative messages. One, if you ignore the behavior, you're pretty much condoning, or you're giving them the impression that you are not really paying much attention to them, and so they can continue on. So those are two things that we really don't want to happen anyway. You can also make that declarative statement. And when we make a declarative statement, we create an environment in which the book talks about psychological resistance. It's basically where students or a human being would prefer not to be told what to do. And in that declarative statement move, you put them in the position where they can become resistant, or they can become aggressive. And so that leads to those more challenging behaviors. And so how can we deal with this impossible choice? And that's why these gentle guidance interventions were put into play to help you navigate these waters of these low level negative behavior. And so replace the demand with just these simple guidance interventions. And I say simple, but it's a more gentle guidance interventions to avoid the impossible choice. Remember, pass by, no eye contact, and just nicely say, you know what to do, and then move on. Second password, the impossible choice. So jot that down. Second password, the impossible choice. Now, what if we go in and we're having class, and you observe the students not being as responsible as they should be? And so sometimes these are just things, managerial types of things in the classroom. They're not doing something, but it might be things that are on the floor. There might be protocols or papers that have not been put in the right spot. So these procedures that you have put into place are not following through, or there's materials that just haven't been put away. What would you do? Think again, keeping it low level negative behavior. It's called the statement of fact. So we're on number 4 out of the 5, the statement of fact. This is really just a statement that should not be true, but you're just calling it to their attention. So things like, there's a calculator on the floor. You're not telling someone to do something. Remember, we don't want to get in that impossible choice. Normally, This takes 2 seconds. There are test papers still out on students' desks that remind students that they shouldn't be communicating with each other. These are just statements of facts. Very simple, easily implementable. Now, what if a students are engaged in challenging behavior? Students are engaged in challenging behavior. And when I say challenging, it's not like good challenging. I'm thinking more like the negative challenging behavior. What would you do? I feel like this is a repeat, but there is the fifth option. It's called the quick question. And I love this because when I first read this, I thought, oh my gosh, we do this. Questions are most often found when we are focusing on academics, but they're not common when we're dealing with negative behavior. And so a simple question like, what should you be doing? Might just have them pause. Again, we're not getting into that reactive um, scene. We're not trying to escalate where they're going to then become resistant. We're just asking them. And there are multiple questions in this book that can easily be embedded into our daily practices so that we think through helping students determine. They're going to be taking ownership of redirecting their own behavior. Like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't be doing that, but you did say this. And sometimes it might clarify some confusion that the students really were off in a different world when you were giving directions. And so it provides some opportunities for us to redirect without escalating this, into a power struggle or a big behavior. So there's five of these that we've just talked about, and you'll find that in the article. The article is actually the article that I'm talking about is in your training guide, and I have a link to it here. And so if you want more information, check out this book. It's wonderful. Chapter 9 has, well, let's just say, Chapter 9 has more than just five. Chapter 9 has 42 gentle guidance interventions, and some of them are mixed, where you put the good question with, maybe the confused eye. But we want you to have opportunities to just embed these and I don't want to say they're little behaviors. They can create havoc in your classroom if you don't control them, but it's a way to do it so that you do create this inclusive classroom. The last password is GGIs. GGIs. So keep that as number 3. Our goal again in this session is for you, the participant, to learn how to implement GGIs. And these are very, very quick, high yielding strategies to reduce the power struggles between students and teachers. Keep in mind that you have additional resources within this training guide. And I just want to thank you for taking the time today to learn and dig into some additional tools that will help build the best positive classroom for all our students. Thank you again.